Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice for radio. So today, we're going to be looking at Flygon. Flygon is finally starting to become a good deck. I've shown you recently that Stage 2 decks are a lot more viable than they were before. Stage 2 decks can finally be good, and it seems like in a world where Stage 2 decks are good, Flygon comes out and asks if you still remember him. Yes, Flygon. Yes, we do. Now, the Flygon GX is our main concern here. There are others, we'll get to them in a moment. And this one's always been a little bit exciting. Flygon GX has an ability whereby if it is your active Pokemon, all of your Pokemon take 30 less from attacks. That is to say that any kind of spreading your opponent might do will essentially be pointless, because very little spreads more than 30. But it also means that you're taking 30 less from attacks with 240 HP and only giving up 2 prizes. It basically means your opponent has to do 270 to get a one-hit KO, which is what you would expect to need to get something like a Mewtwo and Mew or a Reshiram and Charizard that give up 3 prizes. Yeah, that's a little bit in your favour, ladies and gentlemen. Now, it's not cheap, alright? That's a huge downside of Flygon. Free fighting energy, 120 damage, but if there's a stadium in play, it does 240 and you discard the stadium. Or free fighting energy, GX attack, 220, not affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So if your opponent does try and pop something like a Keldeo in the active to try and block you, you just come out and be like, nah mate, not happening, not doing it. It is worth pointing out at this stage, though, that there is a really nice Vibrava that we did get in Cosmic Eclipse. Now, the attack is nothing special. 2 energy, 40 damage, one could argue is actually actively bad. But it's got an ability, Obnoxious Whirring. Great name. Whenever your opponent plays a supporter card from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. What that means is your opponent cannot use any supporters against this. So, I mean, we don't have something like Guzma at the moment to drag it up. But if your opponent were to try using something like Team Yell Grunt to get rid of the energy on there, for instance, that would fail. It wouldn't work. Gives you a little bit of protection before you get rolling. Now, one thing that might really surprise you about this deck is that it does not play Rare Candy. We don't play Rare Candy. We are playing a Stage 2 deck, and I'm going to show you 2 deck lists in a minute. And between those 2 deck lists, we have 0 copies of Rare Candy. How can that possibly work in a Stage 2 deck? And the answer is, hey, remember when I told you this was a really expensive attacker? We need red and blue. This deck only works because of Red and Blue. Red and Blue is a tag team supporter card that allows you to search your deck for a Pokemon GX that evolves from one of your Pokemon in play and evolve it up. And then if you discard 2 other cards from your hand, you get to search your deck for 2 basic energy cards and attach them. We don't have good energy acceleration for fighting Pokemon. The best we have is Groudon. These decks aren't playing Groudon. Groudon is not really good enough or fast enough. We need red and blue. So we're not playing Rare Candy in this deck because if you don't get red and blue, you ain't getting it rolling. You've got to evolve manually. You've got to evolve up to Vibrava and then play a red and blue. Do remember as well that red and blue does not allow you to break the rules of evolution. You cannot use this card during your first turn or on a Pokemon that was put into play this turn. So you are talking about a turn-free Flygon. But in theory, it's a turn-free Flygon, and then every time you need a new Flygon, you just play a red and blue. The first one's a bit awkward, but by the time you've got the first one, you should have a setup where you've got a Vibrava out, so as soon as you need one, you get one. Now, in terms of other Pokemon here, we really need consistency. I should mention that both lists play 1 copy of Diancie Prism Star. Of course they do, it does extra damage. Why would you not? But one list chooses to go with Jirachi. That one that sits in the active and you look at your top 5 cards of your deck, find a trainer, put it in your hand, free retreat with a skateboard even though the ability puts you to sleep. We are familiar with that Jirachi. It also plays one copy of Oricorio GX. If you had a Pokemon KO during the previous turn, draw 3 cards. Now, it doesn't stack, so there's no reason to ever really play more than one of that Oricorio, but you play one of that Oricorio, and if your opponent takes out a Jirachi, a Flygon, etc., you get to draw some cards. The other list goes Silvally, and you can't blame them for this. Silvally GX has an ability that lets you draw until you've got 5 cards in your hand. You're, a lot of the time here, going to need to play red and blue for consistency. And then you are going to need to discard 2 cards from your hand at the same time. So it's pretty gosh darned important to have some other draw here. Whether it's Jirachi or Oricorio or Silvally, if you don't have other ways to draw cards, you're not going to be able to cope with this deck by the very nature of the deck. Now, both lists do actually play one of the Fione from Cosmic Eclipse. It goes on the bottom of your deck when you want it to, meaning you can't deck out, but it also gives you a nice option for making your opponent switch their active. It's not proper gusting, they get a choice as to which one they're going to use, but they still have to switch their active, and that can be pretty huge. And the list with Silvally does play a few other Pokemon. We have a Ditto Prism Star, because that can evolve into Vibrava and then boom, red and blue. But you're also playing the Silvally in that list. And you're also playing Lucario GX. It's just a general good fighting type attacker. It's also an option for a single energy attacker. If it evolved this turn, you can do 120 for a single energy. Or for 2 energy, you can do 30 damage for each damage counter on it. It gives you a lower energy cost option than Flygon. But we also see a Marshadow and Machamp. And again, Marshadow and Machamp is just another option here. The best one is, well, it's either Revenge, 30 damage, but 120 if one of your Pokemon was KO'd last turn, or 3 energy 200, or 4 energy 200 damage. If it would be KO'd next turn, it goes down to 10 HP remaining, rather than getting KO'd. Again, it's a very expensive attack, you're not going to use it all that often, but it is nice to have it there as an option. The thing is, if you can red and blue into a Flygon, you may well end up having a couple of turns where you don't need your energy attachment onto Flygon, and that will give you time to get a Marshadow and Machamp rolling, for instance. Now, in terms of energy here, we're largely just going fighting. I mean, that's what Flygon uses, and also, you can only search basic energy with red and blue, and it's gotta be fighting for Flygon. But we do see one of the lists doing that trick that so many decks are doing nowadays, whereby they play a single copy of the relevant unit energy, just so they can then search it out using Guzma and Hala. And obviously, with the importance of red and blue in this deck, Tag Call becomes a really good card, because it lets you search out your tag team supporters, like red and blue. Not the only tag teams we see. We of course see Cynthia and Caitlyn. We see that in every deck. It's a really good consistency card. Get to support her back and lets you draw 3 cards. And we see Mallow and Lana, which lets you switch and heal 120. Again, a good card that we see very much indeed. Now, the lists do differ a little bit here. One thing that doesn't differ between the lists, they both play Quick Ball and they both play Evolution Incense. Those cards that I told you were going to make a lot more decks a lot more viable. Though the list that plays a whole bunch of GXs does obviously play a bunch of Cherish Ball as well, because that's really nice for searching out those GXs. The other card that's really important in both the decks here, our stadium of choice, is Martial Arts Dojo. And it kind of has to be. It does an extra 10 damage if you've got a basic fighting attached, and you will, or an extra 40 if you're behind on prizes. So if you're behind on prizes attacking with Flygon, with a Diancie Prism Star and a Martial Arts Dojo out, then you're not actually hitting for 240, you're hitting for 300 damage. Plus 20 for the Diancie, 40 for the Martial Arts Dojo is 60, that's 300 in total. Of course, do remember you only do the extra damage if you've got a stadium in play, but that's why you play a full 4 copies of Martial Arts Dojo. and you've got Guzma and Haller to help search it out. And for anyone wondering about the ruling, you discard the stadium after doing the damage, so I believe you would still get the extra damage from the stadium, because the card reads, this attack does 120 more damage, then discard that stadium, i.e. discard it after having done the damage. I'm fairly sure that's correct. Here is the first list. You can see this is the one that plays just Jirachi with 1 Fiona, 1 Diancie, 1 Oricorio. A more straightforward list, but they do have the special energy there with Guzma and Haller to give themselves a fun little option. Although worth noting, they do play Professor Elm's lecture to get the basics out. Looking at the second list, this one's a little bit more techy. We've got the Silvally line, we've got the Lucario, we've got the Marshadow and Machamp, as well as the Diancie and obviously the Fiona. And then you've got your Mallow and Lana, but there's one of those in each of the decks. And there's 4 Custom Catcher to give extra gusting in advance of just the Fiona. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. A deck that a lot of people have been asking me about. I've had a lot of messages going, Wassy, how can I make Flygon work? Here's how. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Tell me what you think about this deck. Tell me if you're testing it. Tell me if you think it's really going to work. Go nuts in the comment section, but please remember the rule. Be nice, would you? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at @TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we can talk about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but we still love them. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would you? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.